Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about preparing for a 2021 summer law job. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about preparing for your 2021 summer law job. Welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Well, it seems kind of strange to be talking about this again, since we actually did an episode on virtual summer law jobs a year ago and probably didn't anticipate they would continue this summer, but here we are. For the most part, it seems like summer positions are going to be virtual again. I don't know about you. I've heard of a couple of law firms who are planning to do in person and some who are still considering it, but largely it's going to be virtual with maybe a few in-person events later in the summer. And I'd guess most non-law firm jobs will be similar, given that most offices of any type aren't really fully operational yet. So to start off, what do you think employers learned from last summer? Like, how did these virtual programs work out?
I think they learned that they worked out pretty well and better than they expected. And I think that it wasn't as weird as they thought it was going to be. So I think that it was really a pretty positive experience from what I've heard. And most of the summer programs last year were sort of shorter. But I think, in the end, they were like, oh, we could have done this, the whole time. We could have made it work.
Right. I mean, that's what I've read and heard as well. If you look at the summer associate surveys and things like that, people were actually relatively satisfied, even though these were, definitely more ad hoc than I think they will be this summer. That was really like the heart of, oh my gosh, everything's shutting down. What are we going to do? Some firms canceled things, some firms shortened them. But overall, I think people figured out how to do this, and it basically kind of seemed to work.
And I think people are kind of willing to go with the flow with how things are sort of in the world right now. So people are, I think more agreeable, and less complaining and things like that about little things.
Right. How do you think these are going to be different this summer?
Well, I think they are doing regular size programs. And from what I've heard, they're doing sort of normal, like number of summers that they, would have had pre-COVID. So I think they're trying to go back to more of what they normally would have done, but just in a virtual setting.
Right. I mean, the other difference is they've had over a year now of remote working to sort of figure out what works, what doesn't work. And also, most people who are coming in have been doing remote school for the last year. So I think everybody's probably just a little more qualified, a little less freaked out about how is this possibly going to work out, because people have been making it work for a year now.
And you probably met all these people through remote interviews.
Right.
So, you're already familiar with them in this remote world. And, I think OCI went really well from what I've heard also. So interviewing was fine remotely. So I completely agree. I think people sort of have the hang of it, know what they're doing, know sort of the, best ways to, make this as normal as possible. And I also think they have more time now this year that they've decided, pretty far in advance that they're going to do it remotely so they can plan that way. And last year, I bet a lot of places were sort of waiting to the last minute, not sure what they were going to do. If you think about sort of the timing of when all of this hit and what the world was like then, we just know more.
Absolutely. Do you think, given all of that the expectations around work product are going to be higher, kind of more standard? I know some places last year just said up front, like, we're giving everyone an offer, you don't have to worry about it. Do you think there's going to be more sort of looking at the actual work product?
I do. I think it's going to be more, again, like a normal summer. In a normal summer, most people get offers. I just want to say that.
Right.
But I think the expectations are you're going to work like you would have worked normally. I don't think you're just like getting a free pass or anything like that.
Right. I mean, I think now, as you said, I mean, the whole process has been virtual from the beginning. So it's not like it's this crazy thing we don't know how to deal with. So I do think people, and we'll talk about this a bit later, you need to be preparing to do solid work to make sure that at the end of the summer that you are on that list of people that everyone's happy with.
Absolutely. I also think in the same way, like you had more time than you would have had last summer to prepare and sort of know what was coming and know, what was going to be expected of you. So, I'd keep that in mind too. It's not like this was just thrown at you at the last second.
Right. I mean, you should, know that you need to have a place you can Zoom and that kind of thing. Well, along that line, let's talk about some basic things people need to think about before their jobs start in terms of just the practicalities. What do you think they need to be considering?
Well, I think they need to realize that even though it's remote, it's a job. And so you should have a dedicated workspace. And I know, you may be limited, not have an actual room that's just an office wherever, you are. But you got to figure something out that's going to make sense. That's a real, work situation. I don't think you should plan to be in your pajamas in your bed all day or anything like that. So I think that's most important, like planning that out.
Right. And I think, there are ways that you can make this work even in a very small space. Say you're in a studio apartment, you don't want to have everyone looking at your bed. I mean, you can use a background on a Zoom or something. But what I think I would try to do in that scenario is just have a very small table and have it facing the wall. And then, nobody has any idea, like it's just you and a wall.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be a formal desk. I mean, I think it's great if you can fit a real desk, but there's a lot of things that can be a desk. And figure out what's going to make sense. Like, do you need something where you can stand up or sit down, or what kind of chair? I would really think about all of the details. What's your tech setup? Do you have good Wi-Fi? Do you have everything you need? I'm sure they'll be giving you, all of the basic tech stuff you need, but, making sure that all of that is good to go going into it.
Right. Because, you've had a year to sort this out. So you should hopefully have a functioning like computer and Wi-Fi situation at this point. One thing I think people may need to think about is where they want to live. I mean, this seems like an obvious one if you're going virtual, but what if there end up being in-person options, by the end of the summer? How important do you think that's going to be if someone's decided that they're going to move home with their parents or something?
So if you, for money reasons or life reasons or, whatever's going on right now, you need to, like, let's say, be with your family, or it'd be really difficult for you to get somewhere. I totally understand. And I think they'll understand if you explain that. I actually would be a fan of you living in the city that you were going to be in anyway, if that's doable. And that may not be. But a lot of, summers are picking a city maybe that they're not in normally. So just being there, even if you're not going to the office, might be a good idea. Like, what would life really be like there? So I think it's something to consider, even if it may not be obvious if you're going to be remote, and then being available, like you said, if there are activities. Because if it were me, I would try to make it work. I would try to be as available as possible. And even if nothing's going to be held against you, or you're like personally not comfortable going in person, I think that's okay. But I would try if it were me, and I would want to get to know the place that, I'll probably end up at, particularly if it's somewhere you haven't spent time before. So I think that's an idea to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think all things being equal, it's probably definitely better to be physically in the location where you're working, just because opportunities may come up, even just to, go on an outside walk or something with someone from the office. I don't think it's necessarily. If they tell you you can work anywhere, then I think you can take them at their word. Nobody's going to change their mind halfway through the summer. But I do think it just gives you more flexibility. And as you said, lets you see, what would it be like to live here? And if you find out that actually you really detest living in New York City, then maybe you want to try to get an offer at a different office or something like that.
Exactly. And maybe this is your 1L summer, and so you were going to test something out, that you hadn't done before. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to try out the location. And so if it's doable, I would do it. I wouldn't just be like, oh, will it be easier not to move? I don't really want to bother. Like, to me, that's not a reason not to do it.
Right. I think, obviously if the hassle level is enormous, then whatever, don't do it. But if all things are kind of equivalent and it's just like a little bit of a hassle, I think it's worth being there because, we're recording this in April, and by August, it's very hard to say what things are going to look like.
Absolutely. Things seem to change so quickly. So, I would go in optimistic that, maybe you will be able to see people.
Right. I would think at least you'd be able to see some people outside. That doesn't seem crazy to me at this point, the way it might have seemed crazy last April.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what are some general things people should be thinking about in any summer job, setting aside the fact that you may or may not be meeting people in person, but just in terms of, work and kind of how to make a good impression here.
So something to think about is that you shouldn't be ever turning in drafts. And I have people, say to me like, oh, well, this is just a first look. So if there are mistakes, I'm going to fix them. Like, if you're giving it to somebody, then you're saying it's your best, it's your best form. And it doesn't mean they can't substantively give you comments, but it shouldn't have typos or be, sort of half done or anything like that, unless, it's supposed to be an outline. So I think you should feel like everything you're turning in is really good.
Right. And I think there are ways to finesse the fact that maybe you need input or something like that. And you should find out, for example, like, should you have all of your citations be totally perfect or not? Like, you want to clarify that. But, if you have a draft, it's not really a draft. It's basically something that with a little bit of editing or input or something could actually be submitted. And I think that's just a mindset you've got to get into. Obviously no typos, but also not like big chunks of we need to figure out what to do here. That's not really helpful. If you're not sure where, how to form an argument or something, or like which direction it wants to go, lay that out for the person who's going to be reviewing it. Like, here's a decision point. Like, we need to decide between A, B, C, and D. These are the pros and cons of each. Let me know which one you would like me to do, or if I should do more research. Because, people want to see this as like solid work product.
And I think a mistake that some summers make is sort of they think the expectations on them are low because, oh, I'm just a summer associate or something. And so, well, they know I'm just a summer associate. That's not how you should see it. I think you should consider yourself, an associate, and that's, you're doing your best work, and they have high expectations of you.
And people generally haven't made up the stuff they're giving you for no reason. It's not just like a pretend assignment, like your legal writing class. Generally speaking, if somebody has asked you to do something, it's because they actually need it. And so I think that's a good way to think about it. Like, you're a contributing member of the team and you are helping people with something that's actually going to be used.
Absolutely. And I would say on that note, consider everything the same. So sometimes they might give you something where, they've been wondering about this and they wanted you to research it. And so it's not directly something, for a client or, whatever it is, but it's something that they genuinely wanted. And so you should treat it all the same. If you were given this assignment, it's real.
Absolutely. And I think, ideally you also want to try during the summer to get some type of meatier assignments and not just these kind of one-off research projects. So sometimes as a summer or an intern, you will just have people call you up and be like, hey, I need you to research like what the law is in this particular jurisdiction. I think there's a circuit split. Can you get me something this afternoon? And you spend a few hours doing it and you send them something and it's done. And those things are fine. But it's great if you can get something that's a little more ongoing. Do you think that's a realistic option in most places?
Absolutely. And hopefully there's like a summer assignment coordinator or somebody on the summer committee who's kind of helping you make sure that you're getting good assignments. And I definitely like to look at them overall. So I think it's good to have sort of a mix. But I absolutely agree that I know in summer meetings we'll talk about, that they didn't have anything, that took a long time or that was, over the whole summer had different due dates, so that you could show that you can keep up with that, that you could work with somebody, over a period of time. And meet their expectations. So I completely agree. And if you're not finding that, I think you should ask for it. I think you should seek it out because you do want to show, that you can do substantive work. And I completely agree. You don't want to just be doing, something that took 2 hours here or there.
Right. And, if nothing's coming out of your actual work, there may be things you can do, for like even researching an article for someone who wants to, not a professor, a partner who wants to write something, and they may have you work on that. Like something like that is also legitimate, assuming that it's like an actual meaty research project, you're working on it, you're doing a couple of drafts, and then you're producing something by the end of the summer. That's totally fine.
Or a lot of times, they'll partner up with a pro bono organization outside the firm to maybe do like ongoing summer projects and have them work on those. And those are actually sometimes the biggest projects. But I have noticed that summers don't always take that as seriously or don't realize the deadlines are important or don't understand because it wasn't inside the firm. So just so you know, if that comes to you, that is a real assignment like anything else. And sometimes that's the biggest thing you're going to do.
Right.
So I would, do a really good job on it.
Right. Because you don't want to blow it off and then have at the end of the summer, they talk to the coordinator of this pro bono project who's like, well, Alison didn't turn in these 3 things on time. As a result.
And like left us hanging.
Yeah. Like our client like didn't get their order they were trying to get. Thanks. That doesn't look good.
And that has happened to me before.
Not
that exact situation. Yeah, where they their summer was over and they couldn't finish it. That's just totally unacceptable. So I would just think about kind of how the balance of your work looks. And on that note, something I always recommend is picking an assignment in an area that you wouldn't naturally think you'd be interested in. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of summers don't listen to me on this. But I think it's great. Like, most of them come in wanting to do litigation. I'm like, why not try a corporate assignment, a tax assignment, an estates assignment, whatever it is. Just try something. If you don't like it, then you didn't like it, but maybe it'd be interesting and maybe you'd meet somebody that you wouldn't meet otherwise.
Right. And also I think if you've only done 1 or 2 years of law school, you've just only really been exposed to litigation. I mean, even now I have no idea what corporate people do. And that's probably an oversight on my part. Like maybe I should have figured it out.
Absolutely. So I think, now's the time to stretch yourself because once you're assigned to a practice group, that's basically where you are. You're not going to get to, figure it out as much. And I have had people, switch what area they're interested in. And also remember at the end, they're going to ask you to choose what areas you're interested in or rank. And so it's good to have like a few different options.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great advice. What do you think people should do? Like say that they're getting an assignment or a project, like how particularly, in this virtual setting, can they make sure that they're not going to screw this up completely?
Well, basically I'd say to do things like you would in person, except this time it's going to be, a call or a video, and make sure that you have that call or video to go over the assignment first. And so that means you understand exactly what's expected of you, how long they anticipate it taking, if they want you to check in, if it's taking longer, if they have, specific due dates, billing numbers, who you should go to with questions, whatever questions you have. I would worry in a virtual environment, there's a chance that this just happens over email, and I don't think that's a good idea. I think if, you should try your best if they're not, setting something up to say like, could we set this up so that it's actually a conversation. And I would say, maybe you need to schedule like more than one check-in and you don't want to be annoying. But you want to make sure that you're on track and that you're communicating with them, because I think virtually it could be harder. And I think a lot more things happen over email, which saves time in certain situations. But I think there's other situations where, a call talking live is better.
I agree. I mean, when I was an associate, I would always try to have somebody who I was assigning work to, come and sit with me so that we could actually go back and forth. And inevitably, even though I had tried to prep a document that I felt like gave them enough background and told them what I wanted them to be doing, inevitably there were things that we ended up talking about, I should also tell you this. So that's kind of the thing where that's where you want to get someone on a phone call or video call, so that you can say, oh, well, wait, who is this person? What is their relation? Oh yeah, I didn't tell you, their whatever. Because you do need that. And I think it's great if after you've turned something in, if you can also have a call, to get feedback, although that might be aspirational in some cases. But I do think it's at least worth asking.
I completely agree in feedback scenario where lawyers really struggle. But I think asking for things is always okay. And you may or may not get it and you have to accept that. But I actually think asking for feedback is a great idea.
Right. And I think you can phrase it as, hey, I really enjoyed working on this project with you. I hope that you were satisfied with the results. I'd love to talk with you about what went well and what maybe I could improve on. So if you have, a few minutes, I'd love to set up a call. Nobody's going to be like, oh my gosh, what are they? They're so demanding,
Exactly. I think they'll really appreciate it. And also, I think we've talked in the past about how to deal with negative feedback. So maybe listen to that episode before you do that, because you want to make sure you're sort of prepared if, the feedback's not positive, because you're asking for the truth.
Right. And also, if you ask early, it gives you a chance to sort of correct that, or at least hopefully maybe, do another project with that person if they weren't happy with you, to at least try to turn it around, versus you just don't know that they were super displeased with what you did. And then end of the summer, you find out that, this was the case when you get your final feedback and suddenly you don't have an offer. It's just not a great scenario.
So I think that's such great advice. If anything doesn't go well with someone, even though your instinct may be to run away and never talk to the person again, what you actually should do is try to work with them again, seek it out, make the effort, because you get an opportunity to do it different. And hopefully you've learned whatever it was that didn't go right, and you can, make some changes in sort of how you're doing things, what your relationship is with the person, whatever it was that wasn't going right. So you kind of have to fight that instinct to run in the other direction.
Right, which is very natural. And you think they already hate me. Why would I want to interact with them anymore? It's well, they probably don't hate you. They're probably just disappointed that you screwed something up and that was annoying to them. But if you can come back and do a great job on something else and make their life easier, then hopefully that's the impression they're left with, not the screw up.
And we would always make sure to try to do that. And I can say that I've never had a partner say that they wouldn't work with the person again and give them another try ever. So as much as you might not, think that would be the case, it's the case. They will give you another shot.
Right. They probably won't give you a third try, but they'll give you a second.
Well, maybe you just learn that's not your person.
Yeah, things happen. But, if you can knock it out of the park and obviously you have to really commit to doing your best possible work if you work with them again. But I think most people, they're understanding. Maybe you didn't understand what you're doing the first time, and, they probably understand maybe they didn't do the best job explaining exactly what they were looking for. People are pretty realistic.
I also think in the virtual environment, figure out how people are doing things. So, do they do things over Skype or FaceTime or just a call, or they want to be on the messenger, or, however, what hours they're available. Maybe it's different than normal. So just get a pretty good idea of how they're working, given things being virtual.
And I would say make sure that you have their numbers programmed into any phone you're using, so that, we all get a ton of spam calls. I never answer a phone, unless I know who's calling. But if my boss is calling, I would really want to make sure I answered that.
Yeah, maybe even give them a different ringtone.
Yeah, exactly. Something where you're oh, hi, of course I'm available. Absolutely. What do you need? That's a really good impression to set.
Also along those lines, something I was thinking about was, that even though it's virtual, and you probably already know this by now, but, you're expected to be available during the workday.
Right.
And so there can be lots of distractions, but, don't get off track with that. Don't not, answer the phone or emails or whatever, especially when it's, during normal work hours. So this isn't just like a freebie where you don't really have to do anything because you're at home.
Right. I mean, you are generally accessible. You have like email, you have a phone, you have like some probably messenger system, and it's fine. I mean, obviously you can like take your dog for a walk or like get lunch. Nobody's saying you can't have to be like locked to your desk for the entire day, but you probably shouldn't be gone for several hours, like completely offline without letting somebody know that that's going to be the case.
Exactly. Like if you have an appointment or something like that, you can just let someone know that you're unavailable then. But generally, you should consider it exactly the same as if you were in the office during those times, I would think.
Right. Another thing that you can do that I think is great to do when you're in person, but also in some ways might be easier when you're working remotely, is try to shadow people that you're working with. So, if you're working with a partner or more, a senior associate or something, they're probably doing some pretty interesting stuff, whether it's like, a court hearing or a meeting with a client or whatever. And if they're just doing that virtually anyway, I think it's a great opportunity to just ask like, hey, do you mind if I'm included on that call? And I mean, I've been in tons of meetings with a client where we would just say, hey, we were thinking about bringing a summer associate. Is that a problem for you? And like almost always they say it's fine.
Absolutely. And I agree. I think that there would be more opportunities in this environment to just, hop on a call or a video and get to, just see what's going on. So as many of those opportunities as you can be involved in, I would.
Right. And you might even offer like, hey, do you want me to take notes in this meeting or something like that to make yourself a little more useful? Because if they're like in a court hearing and it's just the partner and the judge and then maybe one associate and you, it might be useful actually to have you just kind of sitting there writing down exactly what was happening.
I think that's a great idea. Just, is there anything I can do?
Right. Do you want me to take some notes here? Like, I'd be happy to do that. But yeah, I think you could get involved. I mean, most court stuff is still virtual. I have friends who are doing virtual trials and they say it's totally crazy. I'm like, I would like to sit in on that. That'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It might be more interesting. A cat might walk, into the,
you might
screen, or you might turn into one or something.
Exactly. You never know what's going to happen. So I think that's a great way to just kind of, figure things out and sort of see what's happening. And particularly if you're working in an area that maybe is not your first choice. I mean, what is it like to sit in like an estate planning meeting with a client? I mean, I've never done that type of work, but I feel like it might be kind of interesting.
Absolutely. I think that you should look at kind of the new opportunities that might be available to you.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up, let's return to something we mentioned briefly earlier. Let's talk about navigating any in-person situations if these do become an option. So I know some firms have said, well, we're probably going to be, we're definitely going to be virtual, but we're hoping by the end of the summer, we might be able to have some in-person events. What do you think people need to sort of think about, particularly if you think you're not comfortable or you can't go? Do you think this is going to be like a big mark against you?
I don't think it's going to be a mark against you. I think most people are pretty understanding that there are, so many different ways that people feel about COVID and, navigating all of this. And there's a range, and there's some people who are totally comfortable and there's some people who don't want to do anything. I do think that, we are heading into a time where, hopefully things are going to get better and more people can safely get together and, as you mentioned, outside. So I think there will be more options. I don't think it's a mark against you. I will say that I think you should ask yourself, how uncomfortable am I with this? Could I handle it? Am I safe in the situation? And, would it be good to actually see these people? So I would just make sure you're completely, in touch with where you're coming from. And if it's, sort of rational or where the feeling is. So I would try if they offer you something. I can't imagine that any law firm or anything, that you'd be doing for the summer would ask you to do something that's really out there and unsafe. I would be really surprised. So I just say, to me, anything they're going to offer is going to be reasonable. I think it's totally fine to decline and say, I'm just not comfortable with that. I don't think you need to give a big excuse, and maybe you're not there physically, you're somewhere else, and that's fine. But I would try if you can.
Yeah, I think all you need to really say if you can't go or don't want to go is, thanks so much for the invitation. This sounds really amazing. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it. It doesn't have to be a big thing. And I think it's fine to ask questions too. If you get invited to something and you're like, oh, I don't know, you can ask questions like, oh, can you just clarify where this is going to be held, indoors or outside? How many people do you think are going to be there? How long do you think it's going to last? And then make your judgment accordingly.
Absolutely. I think what I'd say though is if you're not going, it should be because you're not comfortable or you're not there or whatnot. It shouldn't be because oh, this sounds boring.
Right. My only concern of saying I don't feel comfortable is it kind of implies a value judgment.
That's true.
Oh, you shouldn't be comfortable with it either. Or you end up getting into these things oh, I can't do it because of this, that, have this immunocompromised relative, which is just kind of too much detail.
I agree. I wouldn't go into all of that kind of stuff. And I can imagine people really oversharing in this situation. So that's a really good point. So just politely declining, see, in whatever form is probably fine. I have a feeling you'd be just RSVPing with a yes or a no, over email or something.
Nobody's going to follow up. Be why can't you attend? If they do, that's crazy and probably illegal. So I don't really anticipate that.
I just don't even think that would happen.
Yeah. I think they'll be optional. And I think, as you said, if it seems like something you're comfortable with and it's possible for you to go, I think you should err on the side of going. However, I don't think anyone's going to hold it against you if in the end you did not attend the outdoor yacht party.
Not at all.
All right. Well, on that note, any final thoughts about what people can do this summer to set themselves up for success?
Well, I think that my general thought on the summer is that you should kind of appreciate it because it might be the last time we do anything like this. And it might be kind of interesting. And I would say focus on all of the things that are sort of advantages about this, which we've talked about. I think there's a lot of flexibility. I think you may actually be able to get involved and do more than you even normally would be able to. And most likely you're not going to have to do a lot of these events, which you may not want to do in another situation. So I'd appreciate that also. So I would just say, make the most of, maybe the end of these sort of virtual things.
You'll probably get to wear way more comfortable clothing, if nothing else.
Definitely.
I did not have fond memories of traipsing around New York City in 95-degree weather with literally. I remember one time it was so hot that the road, they'd done some road repair and it was melting and got all over these nice white shoes I bought, and I was ugh, so angry right now.
Yeah, and a lot of carrying around your heels while you're walking in your flip-flops.
Commuting on the subway and then having to change into everything for the office and then freezing to death and then dying when you go outside. So at least you'll be able to wear what you want. That's a benefit.
Yeah, and you'll be comfortable.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. With that, we are unfortunately out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com. Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.